Hey guys, tonight we step quietly, well, as quietly as you can manage, into a dim Byzantine scriptorium where lamplight wobbles on tall shelves, parchment curls like sleeping petals, and a suspicious number of librarians glance at you as if you're already holding something greasy near their manuscripts. You probably won't survive this place. By the way, one sneeze near a sacred text, and these scribes will have your head on a decorative platter. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk deeper into the scriptorium, your sandals brushing over mosaic floors that glint like they're made from tiny shattered moons. The air is thick with ink, beeswax, and the faint scent of wool cloaks, warmed by too many silent hours. Tall, narrow windows illuminate drifting motes of dust, tiny golden constellations swirling above rows of wooden desks. At each desk, a scribe bends over parchment, quill in hand, shoulders hunched in that universal posture of people who have been concentrating far too long without a snack break. One scribe, an elderly man with eyebrows shaped like grumpy half-moons, beckons you closer. His fingertips are permanently stained black, and he seems both proud and offended by this fact. Sit, he instructs, pushing a stool toward you with ink-stiffened hands. You obey, mostly because he looks like the type who can tell which page you last dog-eared. He unfurls a scroll with the reverence of someone revealing a newborn or a very fragile pastry. This, he whispers, is why we copy everything twice. You lean in, expecting some dramatic revelation. Instead, he points to a blot of ink marring the corner of the text. Ink splatter, he mutters darkly, as if recounting a murder. One ruined copy, one saved copy. He taps the scroll. This is the saved one. A mainstream historical fact rises in your mind. Byzantine libraries really did operate with astonishing precision. Many scriptoria required at least 2 copies of important works, one for preservation on-site, another sent elsewhere to guard against fire, invasion, or the average clumsy novice who could ruin a page faster than you can say, oops. You glance around at the labyrinth of shelves and suddenly understand why these people treat parchment like treasure. A novice scribe passes by, clutching a small jar of ink like it contains the destiny of the empire. His hands tremble. He's probably imagining all the ways gravity might betray him. You can relate. The last time you tried carrying soup across the room, it became a modern art installation on the floor. Another scribe approaches you, a younger woman, with keen eyes and quill shavings stuck in her sleeves. She rolls out a fresh parchment, its surface slightly shimmering with a thin layer of chalk dust. Write this line, she says, exactly as you see it. She points to a neat Greek sentence at the top of a template. You attempt to replicate it, tongue poking out of the corner of your mouth in concentration. When you finish, she squints at your work like a disappointed cat. Acceptable, she finally says. High praise. Apparently, a quirky tidbit slips into your memory. Some Byzantine librarians were rumored to whisper small prayers over new ink batches, not to bless the text, but to keep the ink from smudging. Whether that worked or not is debatable, but considering the stakes of ruining a manuscript, you find yourself whispering a tiny, "Please behave" to your quill. Around you, scribes murmur, comparing versions of the same page. One reads aloud while another follows with a finger, line by line, hunting discrepancies. This isn't just copying, it's choreography. A precise, ink-stained ballet where a single wrong stroke can become a historical embarrassment. Scholars still argue whether this duplication system began as a defensive measure against disasters, or as a quality control obsession born from scribe culture itself. Judging by the intensity in this room, you're leaning toward obsession. The elderly scribe taps your shoulder again, and motions toward a locked cabinet in the corner. Inside are pristine manuscripts, flawless, shimmering, untouched by novice error. Beside each sits its twin, labeled and wrapped. 2 lives for every text, he murmurs, so that ideas survive, even when we do not. His words settle over you like the dust motes dancing in the lamplight, soft, patient, eternal. And as you curl your fingers around the quill once more, you begin to understand that in this world of flickering flames and fragile parchment, copying isn't just repetition, it's protection, it's ritual, it's love written twice. The quill still feels awkward in your hand, like a tiny, feathery weapon you're not fully trained to wield. But the scribes around you pay this no mind. To them, you're simply another apprentice wandering into the labyrinth of letters, unaware that every mistake you make could potentially ruin someone's future reputation. No pressure. Truly, the elderly scribe with storm-cloud eyebrows clears his throat, causing 3 novices to visibly flinch. Before you copy, he says, you swear. He gestures for you to stand. A circle of scribes gathers, robes brushing softly over mosaic tiles. The lamps flicker as if leaning in for the drama. A parchment is set before you, written in a script so elegant it might actually be judging you. The oath reads something like, I vow to copy with precision, to check each line twice, and to never, under any circumstances, snack while writing. You nod solemnly. You sign your name. You swear. No one asks if you actually mean it. They assume the weight of the room will force you to. A mainstream historical fact floats to mind. Byzantine scribes often underwent formal training and took oaths of accuracy, especially in major scriptoria attached to monasteries or imperial institutions. Preservation wasn't accidental. It was a moral duty, almost a spiritual calling. You suddenly understand why everyone here looks like missing punctuation could ruin their whole week. Once sworn in, you're handed a stack of parchment sheets and ushered toward a narrow wooden desk wedged between 2 very serious professionals. One of them gives you a curt nod. The other doesn't notice you exist, too consumed by perfecting the tale of a single Greek letter. Your first task, says the woman beside you, is to copy this page. She hands you a manuscript already copied once by someone else, and later you will compare your version to another duplicate. If the copies disagree, someone is wrong, and we find out who. You swallow hard. You begin writing slowly, carefully forming each loop and stroke. Every letter feels like a tiny obstacle course. Don't smudge, don't tilt, don't blot, don't sneeze. In fact, sneezing feels illegal here. Halfway down the page, your hand cramps. The woman next to you smirks. You get used to it, she murmurs. Or you don't, and then you get reassigned to glue duty. You glance over. A novice in the corner is indeed stirring glue, looking like someone whose dreams died peacefully but unmistakably. A quirky tidbit comes back to you. Some Byzantine scribes added tiny jokes or complaints into the margins of manuscripts. Little sighs like, my hand is tired, or this ink smells like sadness, or the classic, whoever reads this owes me a drink. You make a stamina, mental note, to someday slip a tasteful complaint into a future copy, but not today. Today you must behave. By midday, you've reached the bottom of the page. The elderly scribe returns, lifts your parchment, and examines it with a squint, so piercing you briefly wonder if he's part owl. Finally, he nods. Now, he says, we compare. He brings out a second copy of the same page, written by a different scribe earlier that morning. Your stomach tightens. He lays them side by side. 3 other scribes lean in like judges at a culinary competition, but with more ink and fewer aprons. Line by line, word by word, they read aloud, hunting for discrepancies. You hold your breath. One scribe murmurs, letter tilted, and you nearly die until he adds, but acceptable. Your soul returns to your body. Good enough, the elder finally declares. For a beginner. High praise. Again, historians still argue whether this double copying process emerged primarily to prevent scribal errors or to improve stylistic consistency across manuscripts. Looking at the ferocity with which these librarians guard their desk space, you'd guess both. No one here trusts a single version of anything, not reality, not ink, not you. The woman next to you pats your back. Welcome to the slowest profession in the empire, she says, where mistakes live forever. You chuckle nervously. She leans closer. Seriously, forever. We've seen errors survive longer than dynasties. That doesn't help. Still, you return to your desk, lifting your quill like a tiny sword once more. The room hums with quiet diligence, the soft scratch of quills, the crackle of parchment stretching, the clink of ink pots. Lamplight warms the edges of manuscripts like gold leaf melting onto the page. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to adjust. Your breathing synchronizes with the rhythm of copying. Your hand steadies. Your eyes catch patterns. Your brain shifts into a hyper-focused calm. The Byzantines would say you're becoming a true scribe not because your work is perfect yet, but because you're starting to see the page not as text, but as responsibility, as memory, as lineage. The elderly scribe passes behind you, and for once, he doesn't sigh dramatically or shake his head. Instead, he murmurs just loud enough for you to hear. One copy preserves the text, 2 copies preserve the truth. And somehow, sitting there in the lamplit stillness of the scriptorium, tracing letters that outlive empires, you feel the meaning settle into your bones. The next morning, you trudge back into the scriptorium, clutching a piece of bread so stale it could double as a blunt weapon. The scribes are already at their desks, hunched like over-caffeinated gargoyles. Though none of them have actually consumed caffeine, they run entirely on duty, stubbornness, and fear of disappointing the head librarian. You slide into your seat, dust a few crumbs from your cloak, earning a glare from 3 people, and prepare for another day of copying. Before you can pick up your quill, a loud thunk shakes the far end of the room. Everyone freezes. A wooden shelf, one of the tall, intimidating ones, containing scrolls older than certain relatives you no longer speak to, has tilted dangerously. 2 scribes sprint toward it with the speed of men who have absolutely no desire to be blamed for a collapse of civilizational memory. They prop it upright, breathing heavily, and the entire scriptorium exhales as one. Another reason we copy everything twice, the elderly scribe mutters from behind you, as if the shelf has personally offended him. You nod, even though no one asked. The truth is, the scriptorium does feel fragile. The walls are sturdy, sure, but everything inside scrolls, codices, bound volumes. Loose sheets feels like it would explode into ash if someone sneezed too aggressively. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Byzantine libraries lived constantly under threat. Fires broke out easily in buildings filled with oil lamps, parchment, and wooden shelving. Floods from heavy rains or leaking roofs warped manuscripts beyond recovery. And let's not forget Siege's armies had a terrible habit of torching archives, either by accident or out of spite. Against all that chaos, 2 copies felt like the bare minimum. Just as you're settling into your writing groove, the head librarian, a stern woman with the aura of someone who has never misspelled anything, summons you. She leads you through a long hallway toward a back room you haven't seen before. The air shifts instantly, cooler, damper, tinged with the earthy smell of parchment, not touched in years. She lifts a torch and reveals a row of manuscripts warped by water, the edges rippled like dried seaweed. A flood, she says simply. Last winter, we lost 6 shelves. She lifts one ruined codex, with a kind of sorrow you've only ever seen at funerals. But we had the twin copies stored at a monastery. Relief softens her voice. This room reminds us why we labor. You run your fingers lightly along a curled parchment. It flakes at your touch just a little, like the text is exhaling its last breath. Something heavy settles in your chest. This could have been the only version. This could have been the end of someone's life work. Someone's story. Someone's voice. She sees your expression and nods knowingly. Books are mortal, she murmurs. Ideas need armor. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some Byzantine monks, terrified of fire, used to sleep with buckets of water by their beds, not for themselves, but for the manuscripts stored in the next room. You wonder what their dreams must have been like. Probably full of dripping scrolls chasing them through monasteries. As you walk back through the hall, the librarian gestures toward a wall where faint scorch marks streak upward. A lamp fell, she explains. Years ago, we nearly lost the section on herbal medicine. She presses her lips together. You'd be surprised how many lives depend on books not burning. You're starting to realize that scribes weren't just copying words. They were acting as firefighters, risk managers, preservationists, and therapists for anxious librarians. Back in the scriptorium, the atmosphere feels different. Every page you see, every careful letter, every meticulous margin now carries a quiet vulnerability. The room is full of murmuring quills and flickering lamps, but beneath that is a sense of shared dread. One moment of clumsiness, one leaking roof tile, one unstable shelf, one invading army, and centuries of accumulated wisdom could vanish. The elderly scribe motions for you to sit beside him. He unrolls a manuscript, showing signs of age, the ink faded, the parchment thinning. This is why we copy, he says softly. A single manuscript is a candle flame in the wind. He points to the second version he made years ago, a cleaner, sturdier copy. 2 candles keep each other alive. You help him smooth the parchment. It's so thin, you can see faint shadows of your fingers through it. How old is it? You ask. 200 years, he replies. Passed through 4 scriptoria, survived 3 fires, 1 flood, and 1 scribe with very bad handwriting. You choke back a laugh. He continues. Historians still argue whether Byzantines duplicated texts primarily for fear of disaster, or because they valued textual purity and wanted multiple sources to compare. He shrugs. Both are true. Fear and pride often work together. As he guides your hand along the margins, teaching you how to support fragile parchment without tearing it, you feel something shift inside you. The work isn't just tedious copying anymore. It's stewardship, protection, participation in a long, trembling fight against oblivion. Back outside, a sudden clap of thunder rattles the shutters. The scribes glance toward the windows, their expressions tightening. Storms are not their friends. Somewhere in the distance, you hear rain, not gentle, soothing rain, but the kind that tests roofs and nerves alike. The head librarian appears. Move the works in progress away from the wall, she commands. And someone check the buckets in the storeroom. Everyone leaps into motion. You help shift a stack of codices to a safer table, your pulse quickening with each rumble of thunder. Water starts slipping through a tiny crack in the ceiling, and a novice rushes over with cloths. In the frenzy, you understand the truth. Copying twice wasn't paranoia. It was survival. When the rain finally softens, the scribes collapse into their chairs, exhausted but relieved. The elderly scribe gives you a small nod, a quiet initiation. Tonight, you learned the true enemy of books isn't time, it's everything else. The storm passes during the night, leaving the city washed clean but weary like a scholar who stayed up too late arguing about Aristotle. When you return to the scriptorium at dawn, the air carries a faint chill, and the stone floors still glisten with traces of last night's leaks. A few scribes mutter prayers of thanks that the buckets held. One pats his favorite manuscript as if comforting a nervous pet. But today, the atmosphere shifts. Instead of hunching over their desks, the scribes line up near the entrance, robes straight, ink pots closed, quills tucked carefully behind their ears. It's unusual. Scribes rarely leave their desks voluntarily. "Imperial request," whispers your neighbor, her eyes wide. "We're going to the palace." You gulp. Nothing like a casual imperial summons to start the morning. A messenger leads you, and a handful of chosen scribes, through winding corridors of the great palace. As you step inside its courtyard, sunlight reflects off marble colonnades and gold mosaics, making everything shimmer like someone overdid the lighting settings. Birds flit between citrus trees, probably unaware that they're decorating the political heart of the empire. You follow the group into the Imperial Library, a vast chamber lined with shelves carved so intricately they resemble frozen waves. Rich tapestries soften the echo of your footsteps. Everywhere, attendants hover with trays, scrolls, and the kind of nervous politeness people use around powerful employers. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Byzantine emperors were obsessive collectors of texts. They built enormous court libraries, sponsored copying workshops, and treated rare manuscripts like treasure because they were treasure. Owning knowledge meant owning prestige, influence, and cultural authority. Duplicates weren't just backups, they were badges of imperial abundance. Your group is brought before a tall man draped in embroidered robes, not the emperor, but the charterphylax, the keeper of imperial documents. His expression says he has not smiled since the last dynasty. "We require new copies," he announces, "for the emperor's personal archive." He gestures to a servant who unrolls a manuscript so pristine it practically glows. It's a theological treatise, dense, delicate, and written in a hand neater than any of your attempts. Next to it lies its twin copy, perfectly identical, except for a faint discoloration near the edge. The charterphylax taps that floor with a long, bony finger. "This," he says sternly, "is unacceptable." You lean closer. It's barely noticeable, maybe a drop of water, maybe a novice's tear. But in the Imperial Library, imperfections are treated like crimes against the state. "Copy both," he commands, "and compare all three." All three. Your soul leaves your body briefly. The head librarian from your scriptorium bows low, masking her horror with professional serenity. You follow her out, carrying the treatises on a silk-lined tray like they're dangerous relics, which honestly, they are. One wrong step, and history might trip. As you exit the palace, a young attendant jogs beside you. "Do you know why His Imperial Majesty keeps duplicates?" he asks breathlessly. Without waiting for an answer, he continues, "Because wisdom must appear plentiful. 2 copies imply prosperity. 3 imply invincibility." You blink. Invincibility. He nods firmly. An emperor with many texts is harder to argue with. You're not convinced that's how logic works, but you decide not to challenge imperial PR. Back in the scriptorium, the manuscripts are placed reverently on the central table. Everyone gathers around. The elderly scribe strokes his beard. "Imperial works," he murmurs. "Twice the pressure, twice the double-checking, twice the headaches. 3 times. This time," you whisper. He closes his eyes in quiet despair. Work begins. You're assigned to prepare parchment, stretching and smoothing sheets until they lie flat like obedient students. Others grind ink or sharpen quills. The most senior scribes prepare to copy, their movements deliberate and ceremonial. A quirky tidbit floats into your thoughts. Imperial scribes sometimes compared their work to weaving divine cloth, threads of ink forming tapestries of meaning. Mistakes were knots that had to be undone. Some even believed angels watched over their ink strokes. Given the pressure here, You wouldn't mind an angel or two proofreading your margins. Hours pass in reverent silence. The first scribe begins the new copy, quill gliding across parchment with terrifying precision. After each completed line, another scribe reads aloud from the original, while the writer follows along, confirming every breath mark, every accent, every comma-like squiggle that looks like it's judging you. You assist by comparing the existing copy with the original. Your eyes blur. The Greek letters begin to swirl like fish. You blink rapidly, wondering if you should have eaten more breakfast or less anxiety. Focus, the head librarian whispers. Imperial copies cannot afford mortal errors. Mortal errors. Excellent. Scholars still argue whether the imperial obsession with duplicates was about genuine preservation or about projecting power. Did emperors care about saving knowledge or about displaying it like trophies? The answer, as always, seems a little of both. As the day deepens, you step outside for a breath of fresh air. The storm has passed entirely now. The sky is bright, the air crisp. You take a long inhale, letting the tension slip from your shoulders. Then a guard hurries past carrying a scroll case. More requests for duplication, he announces to the scriptorium. His Majesty wants backup copies of the military treatises. The elderly scribe groans. Backup for the backup. Wonderful. Soon we'll be copying our sleep schedules twice to prove we rested. You laugh and then stop, worried someone might hear and assign you triple duty. By evening, the manuscripts rest in the center of the room. The original, the first twin, the new copy. 3 siblings in ink, 3 versions of the same voice preserved through human hands, repeating the same words across time. As you blow out the lamp on your desk, you realize something unexpected. Copying everything twice wasn't just a scribal habit. It was a Byzantine worldview, a belief that knowledge deserved more than one life, and that empires feel safer when ideas come with spare parts. You return to the scriptorium the next morning, expecting more imperial treatises, more stern glances, more reminders to breathe quietly so you don't disturb the manuscripts. Instead, when you step inside, you're greeted with an unusual hush, not the normal disciplined silence, but a weighted one, like the air itself is tiptoeing. At the center table lies a stack of vellum sheets, topped with a gilded cover depicting Christ Pantocrator. A soft glow from the morning sun slips across the mosaic floor, illuminating the gold leaf until it seems almost alive. Your neighbor scribe leans close and whispers, "We're copying theology today." You swallow. Theological works aren't just books, they're battlegrounds wrapped in parchment. Sacred texts, homilies, doctrinal treatises, letters from long-dead bishops whose arguments still make grown theologians sigh into their wine goblets. And now you are standing over them with your very mortal, very error-prone hands. The head librarian arrives, her expression even sterner than usual. She taps the cover with a quill. "This treatise," she says, "has already been copied twice in this scriptorium. Now we make another pair, one for the palace, one for a monastery in Bithynia." She pauses, then adds gravely, "And remember, a misplaced breathmark can cause theological scandal." You try not to pass out. A mainstream historical fact rises in your thoughts. Byzantines cared deeply, ferociously about theological precision. A single grammatical shift could imply different interpretations of Christ's nature or the Trinity. Doctrinal debates split communities, sparked councils, and occasionally caused riots. No wonder they copied religious works twice. Losing a manuscript could mean losing clarity in a world where clarity shaped faith, law, and imperial policy. The elderly scribe sits beside you, smoothing the vellum with reverent hands. "We never trust one copy," he murmurs. "The second protects the doctrine from wandering." You glance around. Even the lamps seem to burn more solemnly today. Work begins. You're assigned to help prepare the quills, cutting the nibs at precise angles, dipping them into ink, wiping the excess. It's meditative until one quill splinters unexpectedly, flicking ink onto your sleeve. 3 scribes gasp. One whispers a panicked prayer. Someone reaches for a cloth as though dabbing at a wound. You mutter, "It's just a sleeve." But apparently sleeves matter less than the symbolic proximity of ink to holy text. You keep your hands very still after that. At the center table, the lead scribe opens the treatise. The Greek letters dance with the elegance of a choir. The opening line is read aloud, slow and measured, while 2 scribes write simultaneously, one on the left, one on the right, creating twin copies at the same pace. It's mesmerizing, like watching wings unfold in perfect symmetry. Your task? Comparing each new line to the original, letter by letter, accent by accent, breath mark by breath mark. If you blink too long, you risk missing something. If you blink too little, your eyes dry out and suddenly every delta looks like a lambda wearing a hat. Just when your vision begins swimming, the librarian calls for a break. Scribes stretch their cramped fingers. Someone passes around dried figs. Another scribe jokes, "If the heretics don't kill us, carpal tunnel will." You laugh quietly because theological humor is apparently a genre here. After the break, debate erupts. Not shouting, just tense murmurs and pointed quills. One scribe insists a line reads, "Monogene only begotten." Another insists it reads, "Monogenes times a subtle shift," with enormous doctrinal implications. They drag over the older copies to compare them, flipping pages with trembling hands. You hover awkwardly until the elderly scribe waves you closer. "See," he whispers, "this is why we keep duplicates, not only to preserve texts, but to preserve truth from human error and human intention." You raise an eyebrow. "Intention?" He nods gravely. There were scribes who tried to improve theology by altering words, or rulers who pressured scriptoria to copy works that supported certain doctrines. 2 copies protect us from both carelessness and cleverness. Scholars still argue whether scribal corrections were genuine attempts at clarity or subtle forms of ideological persuasion. But the tension in the room suggests these scribes suspect everyone, including each other, of potential meddling. Eventually, consensus forms. The ambiguous letter was, in fact, slightly smudged by a previous writer. The new copies adjust accordingly. You exhale in relief, though no one else seems to breathe at all. You're asked to step outside briefly to carry a finished page to the drying shelf. As you walk through the courtyard, sunlight warms the vellum, revealing faint impressions beneath the ink script from an earlier manuscript, scraped away to reuse the parchment. A ghost text. You pause, startled, words beneath words, meanings layered like geological strata. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some Byzantines believed that palimpsests, the recycled manuscripts, bearing older writing, had echoes of the past, spiritually embedded in them. A few monks even claimed that sleeping near a palimpsest gave them vivid dreams. Whether true or not, it speaks to how books felt alive to them. You return the dried page to the scriptorium, careful as if holding a newborn kitten. The lead scribe takes it, examines it, and sets it beside its twin. 2 brothers in ink, 2 guardians of doctrine. As afternoon light slants through the windows, you help bind a finished quire. The process is delicate, folding, stitching, pressing. Each quire is weighed against its twin for consistency. Their margins must match, their pagination must align, their ink density must harmonize like instruments in a duet. Finally, as candles replace sunlight, the head librarian steps forward. She opens the 2 fresh copies side by side. She runs her finger down the first page, nodding slightly. "These," she says, "will outlive us." Her voice softens. "Maybe they will outlive our empire." You watch the twin manuscripts lying together, identical yet distinct, like mirrored reflections with tiny human imperfections. And suddenly, you understand. Copying theology twice wasn't just practical, it was reverential, protective, a way of ensuring that sacred thought didn't vanish in a single gust of wind, a single careless hand, a single political shift. As you extinguish your lamp, the twin books glow faintly in the candlelight, two flames, side by side, refusing to be extinguished. You arrive early the next morning, partly because you want to impress the head librarian, and partly because you couldn't stop thinking about yesterday's twin manuscripts glowing like sacred lanterns in the candlelight. But when you step into the scriptorium today, the energy is entirely different. Instead of solemn theological copying, you find chaos. Quiet chaos, but chaos nonetheless. Scribes are gathered in clusters around a long desk where two manuscripts lie open side by side. One is your scriptorium's first copy of a historical chronicle. The other is the newly completed second copy. Both look beautifully written until you look closer. Tiny symbols dance in the margins, little comments, corrections, disagreements, and, in one corner, what appears to be a tiny doodle of a smug-looking cat wearing a scholar's hat. You blink. Your neighbor sighs. Marginal notes, she says. Today we compare the twins. You've heard of this ritual. Byzantines didn't just copy texts twice, they compared them aggressively, hunting for inconsistencies like librarians possessed by the spirit of grammar itself. But today is your first time participating. The head librarian clears her throat. Today, she declares, we reconcile the versions. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Byzantine scribes took textual accuracy extraordinarily seriously. Comparing two copies allowed them to correct errors, remove accidental additions, and occasionally restore lost lines by spotting discrepancies. These comparisons formed the backbone of Byzantine philology, long before modern textual criticism existed. You grab a stool and sit beside the elderly scribe, who motions you closer with ink-stained fingers. Watch, he murmurs. The margins tell the real story. He points to a note on copy A, written in a tidy but annoyed hand. Check the original. This line feels wrong. The same passage on copy B carries a simpler note. Writer sneezed. You bite your lip to avoid laughing. You see, he says, marginal notes are our conversations across time, sometimes helpful, sometimes less so. Work begins. Two scribes read aloud from each manuscript simultaneously, one chanting, copy A, the other copy B. Listening to them is like hearing twins recite a poem, mostly in sync, but occasionally stumbling over a word, syllable, or entire philosophical assertion. Every mismatch is circled, commented on, debated, and recorded. Your job is to log them in yet another notebook, yes, a third version of the same information. Because why have two when you can have three? One scribe points dramatically to a discrepancy. Copy A reads, in the 11th year of the emperor, while copy B reads, in the 12th year. A collective gasp echoes through the room. Which one is correct? You whisper. The elderly scribe scrunches his face. Depends who you ask. He pulls out yet another manuscript, an earlier copy from a different scriptorium. It reads, in the 12th year. The head librarian nods. We default to the earliest source, but then a junior scribe timidly raises his hand. Unless, he says, the earlier source was misdated. The room groans. Historians still argue whether Byzantine chronologies were deliberately altered for political reasons, or simply suffered from enthusiastic but confused scribes. Either way, this is going to take a while. As the debate grows louder, well, louder in the Byzantine scribe sense, which means raised eyebrows and slightly deeper breaths, you wander to another desk where two other scribes are working. Their manuscripts differ in punctuation, Tiny breath marks mark the difference between a saint being well-loved and well-loved, which, to be fair, dramatically changes the tone. A quirky tidbit burrows into your memory. Some scribes used marginal doodles as communication tools or emotional outlets. Cats often appeared because mice loved parchment glue, and scribes hated mice. Cats became unofficial mascots of Byzantine scriptoria, sometimes drawn as heroic mouse hunters, wearing tiny halos. You scan the pages, and yes, there's another cat. This one is chasing a mouse toward a theological footnote about humility. Poetic. The elderly scribe waves you back over. We have another dispute, he says, pointing to two conflicting notes. Copy A. Move this paragraph. Poor arrangement. Copy B. Paragraph fine copyist overly fussy. How do we decide? You ask. We argue, he says simply. And argue they do. Half the room believes the passage flows better in the adjusted order. The other half believes literary tradition demands it stay put. Someone timidly suggests checking how other scriptoria arranged the text. Someone else counters that those scriptoria were woefully incompetent. The head librarian rubs her temples. You take a deep breath and start comparing the handwriting of the marginal notes. Each stroke reveals personality. The sharp angles of someone easily irritated, the soft curves of someone who whispers apologies to parchment, the bold slashes of someone who writes like they're fencing with a quill. As you catalogue the disagreements, you feel strangely moved. These scribes, separated by years and personality clashes, are having a conversation through ink. You're watching a dialogue that spans decades: arguments, jokes, corrections, confessions, all preserved in margins that were never intended to be the center of attention. At midday, the head librarian calls for a pause. Everyone's hands are cramped. Your wrist feels like it's aged 50 years. Someone complains that comparing twins is harder than raising children. You stretch your back and look at the manuscripts again. Side by side, they resemble two mirrors, reflecting the same face with slightly different expressions. Twin truths, each flawed in human ways. But together, they reveal something closer to the original intent. As afternoon light warms the room, the final reconciliations are made. A composite version takes shape, a text built from comparison, correction, and compromise. It feels like watching a mosaic come together from scattered tiles. The elderly scribe pats your hand. This is why we copy twice, he says softly, so the margins can talk, so we can catch ourselves, so no single scribe has the power to ruin a book. The head librarian oversees the final pages being stacked neatly. The twins are not perfect, but they are harmonious. And as you extinguish your lamp, you realize Byzantine librarians didn't fear disagreement. They preserved it. They let the margins carry conversations the main text couldn't. Twin manuscripts weren't redundancies. They were dialogues. You arrive the next day thinking you've finally gotten the hang of this whole Byzantine scribe lifestyle. You've survived imperial commissions, theological landmines, and marginal cat diplomacy. Surely today will be calm, maybe even pleasantly boring, but the scriptorium is strangely dim. The shutters are half closed, the lamps are low, and the scribes are gathered around a single long table with the solemnity of people attending either a funeral or a surprise inspection. At the center of the table lies a manuscript that looks haunted. The parchment shines oddly in the lamp glow, thin in some spots, thick in others, with faint shadows of old writing threading beneath the surface like ghost veins. You can't quite make out the words beneath, but you see enough to know they're there. The elderly scribe beckons you forward with a reverent nod. Today, he whispers, you learn about palimpsests. A mainstream historical fact rises smoothly in your thoughts. Parchment was expensive, painfully expensive, so expensive that even wealthy monasteries sometimes scraped older texts clean to reuse the material. The erased writing, however, never truly vanished. Layers of text hid beneath newer layers, creating manuscripts with multiple lives, whispering through one's skin. You lean in, running your fingers lightly along the surface. In some places, the newer ink is sharp and confident. In others, it thins out, letting the older script peek through like a stubborn memory. Its breathing history, two texts coexisting, uneasy roommates on the same page. The head librarian clears her throat. "We have been asked to make twin copies of the visible text," she says. But also, she pauses dramatically, to recover whatever lies beneath. Recover? You blink hard. This sounds significantly above your pay grade. A scribe with spectacles, thicker than your thumb, steps forward, holding a small bottle. "Vinegar, solution," he murmurs. Sometimes reveals the old letters. You instinctively take a step back. Vinegar, near fragile parchment, feels like letting a toddler juggle swords. He notices your expression and chuckles. Light application. Apprentice. Very light. He dips a brush and gently strokes a patch of parchment. You hold your breath as faint, brownish shapes rise beneath the surface letters. Clearly Greek, clearly older than anything on top. The room leans in. "It's poetry," someone whispers. "No," another counters. "It's a prayer." "Actually," the spectacled scribe says, squinting, "I think it's a shopping list." You snort before you can stop yourself. A Byzantine grocery list hiding under a theological commentary. The universe has a sense of humor. The elderly scribe motions for you to sit beside him with a fresh piece of parchment. "Copy the surface text," he says gently. "Pretend the ghost writing isn't there. Pretend, sure. And pretend that tiny spectral letters aren't floating beneath every stroke you make." You dip your quill into ink and begin the slow, steady copying process, letter after letter, breathmark after breathmark. But your eyes keep drifting to the shadows beneath. Their shapes pulse faintly, almost mocking the neat new script forming on top. All palimpsests are conversations. The elderly scribe murmurs without looking up. The living text speaks loudly. The buried one whispers. A quirky tidbit flashes into your mind. Some Byzantine monks believed that erased texts, especially sacred ones, haunted the manuscripts that overwrote them. Not maliciously, more like a persistent teacher tapping you on the shoulder during class. A few monks even insisted they heard faint chanting from palimpsests at night. Whether that's charming or terrifying is unclear. The spectacled scribe continues working beside you, revealing more ghost layers with incredible delicacy. Occasionally, he gasps softly as a line appears. "Another fragment," he announces, "possibly liturgical, or possibly a poem about goats." You have learned not to question Byzantine genre ambiguity. Around midday, you're asked to help compare the twin copies of the upper text. Easy enough. You recite from your freshly copied sheet, while another scribe reads from the original layer. But halfway down the page, you notice a faint curl of a letter beneath your lines, an older sigma, where there shouldn't be one. You raise your hand hesitantly. The lower text seems to continue under this margin. Everyone freezes. The head librarian rushes over. A moment later, she exhales sharply. "Interesting," she murmurs. "The scribe who overwrote this must have abandoned the lower text mid-page. Should we recover it?" you ask. Historians still argue whether underlying texts are worth restoring when the visible text is also valuable, she says. Some layers are best left sleeping. You stare at the ghost letter again, wondering whether forgotten words feel lonely. As the afternoon deepens, the team creates sketches of the lower text, where it's clear enough to read. The scribes argue politely, but in that intense, eyebrow-powered way, you're starting to recognize about the likely date of the buried writing. "It looks older than the upper text by a century," one insists. "More like 2, another replies. The elderly scribe chuckles. "Or 5. If we keep arguing, It'll age further out of spite. You carefully ink another line, trying not to think about the ghost words staring up at you. It's like writing on top of a sigh. At sunset, when the lamps are lit again, you're tasked with organizing the recovered fragments of the lower text into two neat piles. One for the official archive, one for a monastery that specializes in deciphering erased manuscripts. You handle each fragment like a relic. When you finish, you rest your palms on the table and inhale deeply. The twin copies of the upper text lie before you clean, structured, certain. The notes and sketches of the lower text lie beside them, faint, broken, mysterious. Two worlds coexisting, two layers of memory, two histories sharing the same skin. The elderly scribe places a gentle hand on your shoulder. This, he says softly, is why we copy twice, so the surface survives, and sometimes the shadows too. You look at the palimpsest once more. It glows faintly, like it knows you've heard its whisper. And as you leave the scriptorium tonight, the ghost words follow you, not haunting, not angry, just waiting to be remembered. When you step into the scriptorium the next morning, the first thing you notice is the smell of travel dust, pine, cold mountain wind, clinging to the cloaks of two monks who have arrived before dawn. Their robes are marked with patches of snow, and their sandals look like they've walked halfway across Anatolia, which, as it turns out, they have. The head librarian greets them with the warmth of someone welcoming old friends. "From the Bithynian monastery?" she asks. They bow. "We've come for the twins." Not twins, as in actual siblings, though one of the monks does resemble the other so closely, you briefly wonder, but the twin manuscripts. Two perfect copies of a text, recently finished in your scriptorium. One will remain here, the other will begin its long journey to a mountain monastery, where it will be stored, studied, and most importantly, kept safe. A mainstream historical fact rises in your memory. Byzantine monasteries acted as distant, distributed archives. When cities faced fires, sieges, plagues, or sudden mood swings from emperors, the manuscripts sent to remote monasteries often survived. These mountain archives became a kind of early cloud storage, cold, quiet, and highly resistant to political turbulence. You watch as the monks unwrap a padded wooden case lined with wool, clearly built to cradle a manuscript through rough terrain. The head librarian lifts the twin volume with reverent hands and places it inside, as though lowering a child into a cradle. The monks bow again. "We will walk carefully," one promises. The other adds, "and we will avoid bandits." You blink. "Bandits?" He nods solemnly. "They rarely steal books, but they might steal our boots. Hard to outrun them barefoot." You silently hope the manuscript's safety doesn't depend on their sprinting abilities. After the monks depart through the courtyard, snowy air following them like a loyal pet, the elderly scribe gestures for you to join him at the back of the room. Today, you won't be copying. Today, you'll be learning what happens after a manuscript leaves the city. He unrolls a map dotted with tiny red circles, monasteries scattered across mountain ranges, valleys, islands, and forested plateaus. These places, he says, tapping each circle, are the empire's memory vaults. He points to one perched high in the Taurus Mountains, snowed in for half the year. The manuscripts there sleep better than most emperors. Another sits on a tiny island barely visible on the parchment, hard to reach, bad for invading armies, excellent for preserving literature. He traces a route from Constantinople to a remote monastery. The path winds through forests, over river crossings, along goat trails that look more dangerous than anything you want to walk on in sandals. Most scribes, he continues, never see where their work ends up, but rest assured, your words will travel farther than you ever will. The idea makes your chest warm. Still, you wonder aloud, why send duplicates so far away? Instead of keeping everything in the capital, the elderly scribe smiles. Cities burn, emperors quarrel, armies march, monasteries endure. A quirky tidbit tickles your brain. Some monastic libraries stored manuscripts in clay jars or stone vaults deep underground, not because they expected apocalypse, but because they believed books slept better in cool silence. One monastery even claimed its library cat was blessed by a saint and could sense mold before it appeared. You're not sure if that's pious exaggeration or genuine feline superpowers, but either way, mold detection seems like a useful miracle. He hands you a small bundle wrapped in linen. These, he says, are letters for the monks, updates, corrections, and a note about a missing page we recently found in another copy. We send not just books, but relationships. You raise an eyebrow. Relationships, he chuckles. Scriptoria and monasteries gossip as much as people. Have you corrected the Herodotus paragraph? Did your manuscript arrive with the ink blot we warned you about? Please send us your cleaner copy before our librarian cries again. These letters are how we keep the twins aligned. You carry the bundle to the courtyard, where a messenger prepares to travel with the monks on the first leg of their journey. Snowflakes swirl gently like drifting ash. You hand the linen packet to him, and he ties it securely to his belt. On your way back, you pass a wooden crate, half packed with manuscripts wrapped in wool. Another shipment soon? You ask. The head librarian nods. A monastery in Pontus requested replacements. Dampness ruined a quire. Suddenly, you remember the ghostly palimpsest from yesterday. Will they reuse the parchment? If it's salvageable, she says. Otherwise, we send them a new twin. You hesitate. Do the monasteries ever send twins back to us? Of course, she replies. Sometimes their copies are cleaner, sometimes ours are, sometimes both are terrible, and we must start over. She sighs. Historians still argue whether the rural scriptoria produced better handwriting than urban ones. I say it depends on the weather and how much goat cheese they ate that day. You grin. You're starting to appreciate Byzantine standards, somewhere between strict perfectionism and resigned chaos. As the day wears on, scribes prepare 2 more sets of twins for shipment. You help by weighing the volumes to ensure they balance evenly. Apparently, uneven weight in saddlebags can tilt a mule, and an unbalanced mule leads to unbalanced manuscripts. You love learning practical wisdom you never asked for. By dusk, the scriptorium glows golden with lamplight. The twins destined for far monasteries rest quietly on a table, wrapped and ready. The air feels still, reverent like the prelude to a long journey. You imagine the manuscripts traveling through forests, humming with insects, across rivers, reflecting moonlight, past shepherds warming their hands over fires, up paths that twist between jagged rocks and whispering pines. You picture monks greeting the tired travelers, lifting the twin books with awe, carrying them into stone rooms lined with shelves that echo with centuries. One manuscript stays with you, the other becomes a distant echo, 2 versions of a memory, 2 lifelines for the same voice. Before leaving, the elderly scribe rests his hand on the nearest wrapped volume. This is why we copy twice, he murmurs. So knowledge can walk 2 roads. If one falls, the other keeps going. You look at the map again, at the spiderweb of roads, seaways, mountain trails, and suddenly it feels as though you're watching ideas migrate like birds. Some will return, some will disappear into snow and silence. Some will outlive empires, and all of them, somehow, begin here with ink, patience, and the simple act of making 2. The next morning, when you step into the scriptorium, you find the floor cluttered with crates, rope coils, saddlebags, wax-sealed letter tubes, and what is unmistakably a very unimpressed mule waiting in the doorway. The scribes are bustling around like bees who suddenly realize they're late for winter storage. The head librarian stands in the middle of the chaos, looking both deeply proud and deeply tired, an expression you've come to associate with important projects. "We're sending manuscripts along the trade routes today," she announces. "Both copies." "Both?" You blink. Usually one stays, one goes. But today, it seems both twins are embarking on a grand tour. Your neighbor leans in. "These copies aren't for preservation," she whispers. "They're for spread." Spread, as in the spread of knowledge, the spread of influence, the spread of ideas that, frankly, might intimidate emperors if they thought about it too long. A mainstream historical fact stirs in your memory. Byzantine manuscripts traveled widely along trade routes, carried by merchants, diplomats, pilgrims, scholars, sailors, and occasionally very reluctant messengers. Manuscripts traveled farther than many people ever did. They ended up in Italy, Syria, Armenia, Egypt, the Balkans, Russia, sometimes carried intentionally, sometimes accidentally, occasionally stolen, and sometimes traded for goods or political favors. You watch as two scribes carefully place twin copies of a medical manual into a reinforced case. "This set," the librarian says, "is going to a healer in Trebizond, and this," she points to another twin pair, "to a merchant heading toward the Black Sea ports." You glance at the mule. It sighs loudly. You relate. The elderly scribe calls you over and hands you a folded document. "Inventory," he explains. "Everything that leaves must be recorded twice." Naturally, you open it and see two identical lists side by side. The redundancy makes you smile. Your task is to inspect each manuscript before it goes into its travel case. You check bindings for strength, pages for dryness, margins for clarity. Some of the covers are wrapped in leather, others are sheathed in woven cloth to protect against sea spray. Each twin pair matches almost perfectly, except for small human quirks and ink strokes slightly longer here, a margin a hair wider there. As you lift a geography manual into its case, the head librarian joins you. "These books will be copied again elsewhere," she says. "Our twins will create more twins. Generations of manuscripts," you murmur. "Exactly. Some will return to us centuries later, others will vanish for good." Historians still argue whether trade routes helped preserve more Byzantine texts than monastic copying. I think both mattered. One made memories stable, the other made memories travel. You tie the case shut, feeling the importance of the act settle in your chest. Nearby, a scribe negotiates with a sailor who smells like fish and questionable decision-making. "No water near the manuscripts," she warns. The sailor nods solemnly. "Of course not." His boots squelch. You all stare. He clears his throat. "That was earlier." A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Sailors sometimes used manuscripts as navigational references, not reading them, necessarily, but believing books brought good fortune at sea. A few even tucked small pages from damaged manuscripts into their clothing as protective charms. You sincerely hope none of today's books get plucked for ocean superstitions. You help load crates onto a cart. Some manuscripts will travel by land, others by sea. The land route winds northeast toward the Pontic Mountains. The sea route hugs the coastline, stopping in bustling markets where traders shout prices and argue about olives. You accompany the group escorting the land-bound cart through the city gates. The morning air is crisp, and the streets are filling with merchants selling salt, fish, textiles, amphorae, spices, perfumes, and gossip. The cart rattles past stalls while you try to keep pace, no easy task given the mule's questionable work ethic. At the edge of the marketplace, the merchant receiving the manuscripts bows. His cloak is decorated with symbols from cities along the Silk Road. "Your copies," he says, lifting the lid reverently, "will travel farther than you imagine." He closes the lid again, and pats it like one might pat a sleeping cat. Ideas travel safer when they travel twice. You watch as he moves deeper into the market, where the manuscript twins will soon be surrounded by objects from every corner of the world. Silk dyed in indigo, saffron bright as flame, carpets woven in swirling reds and golds, ceramic bowls shimmering with glazed patterns, as intricate as illuminated manuscripts. The air smells like cinnamon, sweat, roasted nuts, and the faint tang of river wind. The twins do not seem lost here. They seem alive. Back at the docks, you help oversee the sea-bound manuscripts. Sailors shout instructions to each other. Gulls shriek overhead, sounding like they want a promotion. The waves slap the hulls of ships tied along the pier. One sailor lifts a crate and mutters, "Feels heavier than last time." "That's because you skipped breakfast," your neighbor replies. Another sailor ties the crate to a beam inside the ship's hull. "Books don't mix with seawater," he says seriously. "We learned that the hard way." He doesn't elaborate. You choose not to ask. You step onto the pier as the ship prepares to depart. The captain salutes the librarian. "Your knowledge will reach the coast safe," he promises. Unless Poseidon objects, the librarian's expression suggests she has no desire to negotiate with mythological sea gods today. The ship drifts from the dock, its white sail billowing like a banner of stories waiting to spread. You watch it grow smaller, carrying its twin manuscripts toward distant markets, scholars, and curious minds. On your walk back to the scriptorium, the elderly scribe falls into step beside you. "What did you learn today?" he asks. You think for a moment. That duplicates aren't just for protection. They're ambassadors, he smiles. Precisely. A single book stays home. A twin goes out into the world. Sometimes, the world sends something back. You imagine manuscripts crossing mountains, deserts, seas being read by hands that will never touch the original scriptorium where they were created. Knowledge multiplying like ripples across water. Back inside, the scriptorium feels quieter now, as if part of it has gone traveling too. You sit at your desk and run your fingers over a blank sheet of parchment. You can almost feel the roots that stretch beyond the city walls, the roads your texts will walk, the winds they will meet. And you realize, copying everything twice didn't just preserve Byzantine memory. It allowed their ideas to wander. 2 copies, 2 paths, 2 futures. And somewhere, far beyond the horizon, a twin manuscript is already beginning its journey. When you step into the scriptorium the next morning, the air feels different, charged, buzzing with anticipation, like someone whispered a secret into the walls, and the walls are still trying to process the gossip. Scribes sit straighter, ink pots gleam more darkly. Even the head librarian looks almost excited, which is alarming, because she normally displays the emotional range of a marble statue. Then you see why. Laid out on the center table are manuscripts, not just in Greek, but in Latin and Arabic. Their covers vary, some sturdy leather, some polished wood, some wrapped in embroidered cloth, but all of them share the same aura, knowledge that has traveled far, carried by winds, wars, scholars, traders, and sheer determination. Your neighbor nudges you. "Today," she whispers, "we copy into other languages." Your heart skips. This is not everyday scribal work. This is the crossroads of civilizations. A mainstream historical fact drifts in. Byzantine scholarship didn't exist in a vacuum. Greek works flowed into Arabic-speaking worlds. Arabic science and philosophy flowed back into Byzantium. Latin and Greek thinkers borrowed from one another, even while debating theology across centuries. Ideas traveled where politics and armies often clashed, and manuscripts were the passengers. The head librarian taps the table. "We are making twin manuscripts in Greek," she says, "from these Latin and Arabic originals." She pauses, letting the significance settle. 2 sets, 2 directions, Two lifelines. Our versions will help bridge worlds. You sit beside the elderly scribe, who looks positively delighted like someone has just handed him a cake shaped like Aristotle. Translation days, he murmurs, are the best days. Twice the work, twice the headaches, twice the glory. He pushes an Arabic manuscript toward you. The calligraphy loops and curls with elegance so fluid it feels like watching ink dance. This, he explains, is medicine, advanced, brilliant. Without translations, our healers would still think fevers are caused by offended winds. You blink. They're not? He pats your hand. We've come far. Another scribe opens a Latin military treatise. This one, she says, describes siege engines. She looks unimpressed. We have plenty of those, but their version has better diagrams. So today, you will help create Greek twins from foreign originals, translations that themselves will be copied twice to ensure accuracy and survival. The process begins. Two teams form, one translating Latin texts, another translating Arabic ones. Each team has 3 scribes, a translator, a writer, and a comparator. You join the comparator team, assigned to check the Greek text line by line against the translator's dictation. The translator reads the Latin text first. His voice is steady, but his eyebrows twitch every time he encounters an ambiguous passage. Here, he says, pointing, we choose between machina, meaning device, or contraption. Let us not anger future engineers. They will judge us. The elderly scribe chimes in. Historians still argue whether translations should stay literal or aim for meaning. I say, choose both. Copy it twice. You suspect he would copy his grocery list twice if given the option. The Arabic team works nearby. Their translator murmurs descriptions of herbs, surgeries, and astronomical observations. You listen, fascinated. Stars being charted, temperaments being balanced, remedies involving honey, vinegar, and prayers. Medicine written with precision and poetry. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some Byzantine scholars believed Arabic manuscripts preserved Greek science better than Greek scholars did. They even joked that ideas traveled east for vacation, got smarter, then returned west wearing nicer clothes. Looking at the richness of these texts, you can almost imagine them sipping spiced tea on their intellectual holiday. As dictation continues, you compare the new Greek version to the translator's notes. Sometimes, you find small inconsistencies, an adjective misplaced, a sentence too compressed, a concept slightly distorted. You raise your hand. Should this term match the original closer? The translator leans over. Good eye, he says, adjusting the line. Precision ensures the twin copies remain faithful. Hours pass. The scriptorium hums like a hive of multilingual bees. Then a problem arises. 2 Greek versions, one fresh from dictation, the other copied by a faster scribe, do not match. One claims an herb must be boiled. The other claims it must be crushed. Both scribes insist their hearing was flawless. The head librarian rubs her temples. If someone boils a root that is meant to be crushed, she mutters, we will cause a medical disaster. The team freezes. The elderly scribe sniffs the original Arabic passage and announces, it smells like crushed. Everyone stares at him. He shrugs. Experience. To resolve the issue, they scour 3 older translations stored in the archive. 2 say, crushed. 1 says, prepared as you see fit, which is wonderfully unhelpful. Consensus is reached. Crushed wins. You continue comparing. The work feels delicate, like you're threading meaning across cultures, across centuries. Every time a Greek word aligns perfectly with its Latin or Arabic ancestor, you feel a quiet satisfaction, like hearing a chord resolve. By late afternoon, the Greek twins are nearly complete. 2 near-identical medical manuscripts, 2 near-identical military ones. They lie side by side like siblings awaiting their destinies. The translators stretch their stiff backs. One sighs. You know, translation is copying twice, within copying twice. Recursive suffering, someone jokes. Recursive glory, the elderly scribe corrects. The head librarian steps forward. These pairs, she says, will go to 2 different libraries, one in the palace, one to our partners in Antioch. If one is lost, the knowledge survives. If both survive, the knowledge multiplies. The lamps flicker warm light across the newly finished twins. Their Greek letters curve gently across the parchment shapes built from Latin logic and Arabic insight, now living in a new world of ink. You run your finger lightly along a margin. You imagine monks in Antioch reading this text in candlelit silence. You imagine soldiers using the translated military diagrams to build better engines. You imagine healers mixing herbs with more confidence. 2 paths, 2 audiences, 2 lives. The elderly scribe glances at you. Do you see? He asks softly. This is why Byzantium copied twice. Because knowledge speaks many languages, but survival requires echoes. You nod. The twins before you shine gently, their future stretching in 2 directions, bridging worlds that rarely speak, carrying light into hands that may never meet. You return to the scriptorium expecting another day of peaceful multilingual copying. But the moment you cross the threshold, you feel it. The tension, the stiffness in the air, the way scribes keep glancing at one another with suspicious side eyes, as though someone misplaced a comma and triggered a theological avalanche. On the central table lie 3 manuscripts. 2 of them, the twin copies your team painstakingly produced last week, and a third, older manuscript recently returned from a provincial monastery. All 3 are supposed to be identical. They are not. Your neighbor leans close and whispers, "Brace yourself. Today, we deal with censorship." A wonderful announcement. Exactly what every scribe wants to hear before breakfast. The head librarian steps forward. Her voice is steady but sharp like a quill freshly cut. "We have discovered discrepancies," she says, in a theological commentary. Lines missing, lines added, lines altered. Someone, she pauses, scanning the room, has been adjusting doctrine. Gasps ripple through the scriptorium. Adjusting doctrine is not like adjusting punctuation. Adjusting doctrine is how wars start, or at least, exhausting debates. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Byzantine texts underwent heavy scrutiny and sometimes censorship. Imperial politics, theological factions, and church councils all had opinions, strong ones, about what should or shouldn't appear in manuscripts. Scribes walked a narrow cliff edge between accuracy and obedience. When a text conflicted with current doctrine, inconvenient passages had a way of disappearing, and sometimes quietly reappearing in duplicate copies somewhere else. The elderly scribe motions you over. "Look here," he whispers, opening the old manuscript. The ink is faded but clear enough. A paragraph discusses a controversial theological interpretation from a century-old council. He shows you the newer copy. The same paragraph is gone cleanly, elegantly omitted. No trace, no gap, just smooth text skipping from one idea to another like nothing happened. A scribe nearby mutters, "Too smooth. That's the problem." Another adds, "A sneaky scribe is more dangerous than a clumsy one." You examine the second twin. This one does contain the missing paragraph, but slightly modified. A single adjective softened, a verb shifted toward ambiguity. Nothing dramatic, but enough to tilt the meaning. Enough to change a scholar's interpretation. You inhale slowly. So which one is correct? The elderly scribe gives you a long, weary look. Historians still argue whether scribal edits were mistakes, political pressure, or personal theology. Sometimes even we cannot tell. The head librarian spreads the 3 manuscripts side by side. Scribes gather around, frowning like judges at a very disappointing musical performance. "We will reconstruct the original," she announces, "and preserve both variants in the margins." Someone gasps. "Both?" "Yes," she says firmly. "We do not erase contradiction. We archive it. This is new to you, but it makes sense. Copies protect the text, not just the text leaders want, but the text that was." She instructs pairs of scribes to examine every line where discrepancies appear. The room buzzes with intense but nearly silent debate. Fingers trace faded ink strokes. Eyes narrow. Margins fill with notes explaining variant readings. Your job is to annotate the variant catalogue, a document copied twice, naturally, that will accompany the twin manuscripts, so future readers understand where the versions diverge. It feels like writing a biography of a text's life. The clean moments, the messy ones, the parts a manuscript probably wishes you wouldn't bring up in public. As you work, you overhear snippets of whispered commentary. "He replaced unified with harmonized. That changes everything. This line wasn't removed for doctrinal purity. It was removed for clarity. Probably. No. I know that handwriting. He was a troublemaker." One scribe discovers a margin note in the older copy. "Please forgive me for this alteration." The room falls silent. The note is tiny, almost invisible, written as though the scribe hoped no one would ever see it. Not quite confession, not quite apology, just human. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some scribes wrote secret marginal prayers, begging divine forgiveness for errors, omissions, or edits they were forced to make. A few even embedded tiny lamentations between the lines, microscopic cries for help disguised as decorative marks. You glance again at the little apology. Suddenly, it feels like the parchment itself is heavier. The team continues analyzing. At one point, a scribe triumphantly raises a page. "The monastery's version preserved the correct phrasing," he announces. Another shakes his head. "But ours preserved the better punctuation." The elderly scribe chuckles. "Between us all, we have half the truth." Hours pass as corrections accumulate. You begin to see why copying everything twice mattered, not just to guard against fire or flood, but to guard against influence, against the slow erosion of meaning, against intentional edits no one was supposed to notice. 2 copies don't just preserve a text, they expose modifications. They force transparency. Late in the afternoon, the head librarian calls the group together. "We now produce the reconciled version," she says. "This too will be copied twice." You sigh softly. Your hand is already aching. But there is something beautiful in this process, this insistence that truth must be preserved and examined, not smoothed into a comfortable shape. Byzantine librarians weren't just protectors of manuscripts, they were protectors of intellectual honesty, even when honesty was inconvenient. As the lamps are lit, the newer twin copies sit completed. Each includes the restored paragraph and the modified versions in detailed marginals. Nothing hidden. Nothing lost, nothing erased. The elderly scribe pats your shoulder. "Today you learned," he says softly, "why some scribes feared authority more than fire, and why we copy twice. Because one version can lie, 2 versions must argue." You look at the twins, beautiful, complicated, full of scars and clarity. 2 copies, 2 truths, 2 witnesses. And through their stubborn dual existence, a fuller picture survives. You come in the next morning expecting more theological drama, but instead, you find something far more terrifying spread across the scriptorium tables. Bureaucracy, piles of tax registers, legal codes, decrees, land surveys, marriage contracts, shipping accounts, and one scroll detailing how many goats were allowed to cross a specific bridge last year. Riveting. Your neighbor sighs loudly enough to be heard across 3 centuries. Today, she says, we copy the documents that make the empire function. You stare at the mountain of parchment. All of it? Twice, she replies, giving you the kind of smile one reserves for people walking toward doom with enthusiasm. The head librarian claps for attention. These records, she announces, may not be glamorous, but they shape daily life, and they must survive. A lost tax register causes more panic than a lost poem, unfortunately. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Byzantine administration was legendary for its complexity. Laws, land records, tax rolls, military rosters. These weren't side projects. They were the backbone of the empire. And because bureaucratic continuity was critical, these documents were copied regularly, sometimes annually, sometimes seasonally, always redundantly. You're handed a stack of land deeds, thin parchment sheets covered in tidy columns of numbers and names. The territory descriptions are so detailed, you could find the boundaries in the dark, from the old fig tree to the stone with the suspicious dent, beyond the field where Nicetas once tripped over his own sandals, and so on. The elderly scribe joins you. These, he says, tapping the deeds, prevent neighbors from stabbing each other over dirt. A noble cause, you reply. He nods, but only if copied correctly. Work begins. You're assigned to help produce twin copies of a district's annual tax rolls. The original is a long scroll, filled with columns so narrow they feel like they were designed to punish anyone with imperfect eyesight. Names, occupation, codes, payment amounts, each meticulously recorded. Why copy these twice, you ask? Because, the librarian says, if one set burns, no one knows who owes what, and then chaos reigns. You imagine thousands of tax exemptions granted by accident, merchants dancing in the streets, bureaucrats sobbing into their inkpots. Yes, chaos indeed. As you copy line after line of figures, you quickly learn that mistakes in these documents are more catastrophic than theological misinterpretations. A single smudged number can turn a wealthy merchant into a pauper, or vice versa. Your wrist aches, your eyes ache, your soul aches. At midday, you encounter a note in the margin of the original scroll. Do not trust Nicetas. He lies about olive yields. You show it to the elderly scribe. He bursts out laughing. A fringe tidbit, he explains, wiping his eyes. Some tax officials added helpful comments like this. Future scribes copied them because they didn't dare assume what was important. You blink. So this insult has been copied for years? Decades, he says proudly. Nicetas can never escape his reputation. As the day goes on, different teams tackle different bureaucratic terrors. One group copies legal codes, their margins filled with cross-references and clarifications. Byzantine law loved layering addendums on addendums, like a bureaucracy lasagna. You overhear a scribe muttering, "How many times can they redefine property inheritance?" Another replies, "At least twice more before lunch." Another group is copying military rosters. You glance over and see names, ranks, equipment lists, and the occasional note like "missing spear," claims dog ate it. You pretend you didn't read that. Yet another team works on shipping accounts, detailed records, tracking grain, wine, oil, silk, timber, fish, and occasionally livestock. One entry announces, "One chicken escaped." Witnesses claim it voluntarily jumped overboard. A chicken choosing freedom over service to the empire feels oddly inspiring. Your focus returns to the tax register twins. You compare the two copies line by line, grumbling softly as you correct a scribe who consistently writes 7 like a drunk snake. You begin to understand why these documents required duplication. Humans, left to their own devices, will absolutely create chaos. The elderly scribe leans in. Historians still argue whether Byzantine administrators used duplicate documentation because they foresaw disaster or because they distrusted each other. You shrug. Probably both. As the afternoon deepens, the scriptorium becomes a chorus of mutters and scratchy quills. One scribe complains that her legal code scroll is longer than an emperor's ego. Another gently reminds her that walls have ears. Then something unexpected happens. A junior scribe rushes in, holding a damaged scroll recovered from a flood-damp storeroom. The edges are warped, the ink smudged, entire lines blurred into illegibility. It's a census record from 15 years ago, vital for comparing population shifts over time. The head librarian examines it and sighs. We'll reconstruct it using the twins. She retrieves the twin copies kept safely on a high shelf. They're immaculate. Side by side, they allow the damaged scroll to be restored, line by line. Suddenly, you see it. The bureaucracy isn't boring. It's the empire's self-portrait, and the twin copies are its mirrors. When one breaks, the other tells the truth. As evening settles, the twins you've helped produce, beautiful, crisp, infuriating, and absolutely essential, are carried to the archive chamber. You follow, watching as they're shelved side by side, their spines glowing in the lamplight. The elderly scribe pats your shoulder. These documents keep the world running, he says. And when they fail, chaos comes in through the cracks. You exhale, finally understanding. Copying everything twice wasn't just for scholars or monks. It was for dock workers, farmers, merchants, soldiers, midwives, tax collectors, for everyone living under Byzantine skies. 2 copies, 2 safeguards, 2 anchors holding society steady. You leave the archive feeling oddly proud and slightly terrified of becoming Niketas, whose olive yield scandal is now preserved for eternity. You arrive at the scriptorium the next morning, expecting another assault of tax registers or legal codes, but instead, you find something far stranger waiting on the center table. A single, lonely manuscript and a circle of scribes staring at it like it's a philosophical puzzle, a dangerous animal, or both. The head librarian stands with her arms folded. Her expression is conflicted, intrigued, annoyed, philosophically exhausted. Hard to tell. She has only 3 emotional settings. Today, she says, we decide which works deserve to be copied twice. The room goes silent. This is not about accuracy, not about politics, not about lightning-fast copying before a leak destroys a shelf. Today is about worth. You take a seat carefully, feeling the weight of the moment settle like dust on your shoulders. Choosing which texts gain twin lives and which texts fade away is not a task anyone performs lightly. The elderly scribe sits beside you. You'll learn, he murmurs, that copying is easy. Deciding, that's the real burden. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Byzantine libraries, even the largest ones, could not preserve everything. Parchment was expensive. Time was limited. Scribes grew weary. Choices had to be made. Some works were copied over and over. Philosophy, theology, science, classical literature, while others quietly vanished from history, not because they were hated, but because no one had the time, resources, or conviction to give them a second life. The manuscript on the table is a compilation of stories, part history, part folk tales, part rambling digression about a man who claimed to have the world's largest turnip. You sincerely hope that part is fictional. Your neighbor whispers. Half the scribes think it's a masterpiece. The other half think it's charming but useless. You flip through a few pages. It's lively, warm, very human, not technically refined, but full of personality. The kind of book that feels like sharing wine with a talkative uncle who swears every anecdote is true. even when it absolutely isn't. The head librarian gestures toward the manuscript. Arguments. A young scribe raises her hand. It's entertaining and unique, and the language flows beautifully. It should be copied. An older scribe counters. We barely have parchment for legal codes. We cannot spare some for turnips. The room hums with debate. Some stories may be the only record of local beliefs, but we have no evidence any of these stories are accurate. Accuracy is not the only purpose of literature. It's not literature, it's gossip with footnotes. The elderly scribe chuckles softly. And what is history, if not gossip that survived? The librarian shoots him a look. He shrugs, unbothered. Your role today is to observe, reflect, and eventually vote. But before you do, you're sent to review other manuscripts awaiting judgment. You examine a philosophical commentary with brilliant insights but copied so sloppily the margins resemble a battlefield. A collection of herbal remedies used by rural healers containing plants no scholar has ever heard of. A scholarly rant against people who sneeze too loudly during liturgy. Surprisingly passionate. A series of hymns written in beautiful meter, but questionable theology. Each manuscript begs for twinhood. Each has flaws. A quirky tidbit jumps into your mind. Some Byzantine scribes secretly copied their favorite works twice, even when the head librarian disapproved. Hidden twins, smuggled texts, contraband scrolls of poetry tucked behind legal codes. Sometimes these underground duplicates are the only reason certain works survived into the modern era. The thought gives you a mischievous spark of hope. You return to the main debate. The head librarian asks, what defines value? Truth? Beauty? Utility? Stability? Morality? No one answers immediately. Then the elderly scribe speaks. Value, he says, is what future readers will thank us for, or curse us for forgetting. His eyes find yours. Every choice we make here ripples through centuries. Chills run down your spine. After hours of discussion, the group begins casting quiet votes. Tiny marks on scrap parchment. You hesitate. The Turnip Tales manuscript sits before you, innocent, hopeful, slightly ridiculous. Will future scholars appreciate it? Will rural grandparents recognize a piece of their oral tradition? Will a lonely teenager centuries from now find comfort in these messy human stories? You make your mark. When the votes are tallied, the manuscript wins by a slim margin. A sigh of relief escapes from several scribes. Others grumble, but the decision stands. It will be copied twice. The librarian nods. Assign 2 scribes to begin work. Your neighbor nudges you. You helped save a book today. You smile, but the weight of responsibility lingers, because you also helped not save several others. Some manuscripts go back to storage, doomed to wait indefinitely or decay unnoticed. The elderly scribe joins you as you shelve them. Choosing is painful, he says softly, but necessary. If everything is preserved, nothing is prioritized. You ask, did we make the right choices? He sighs. Historians still argue whether the Byzantines preserved the best works or merely the convenient ones. But I believe this. Any text saved with sincerity becomes valuable simply because someone cared. As the chosen manuscript is placed on a copying desk, 2 scribes prepare fresh parchment. Ink is mixed, quills are cut, lamps are lit. You watch the first letters appear bold, alive, determined. The Turnip Tales are getting their second life. Later that evening, as the copies grow line by line, you wander through the archive chambers. Shelves stretch upward like frozen forests of memory. 2 copies here, 2 copies there, echoes upon echoes. Some manuscripts are read constantly. Others sleep for centuries. Some will be rediscovered. Others will wait forever. And suddenly you see the truth. Copying twice wasn't simply preservation. It was judgment. It was hope. It was fear of forgetting. It was love. You run your hand along a row of spines, feeling the heartbeat of choices made long before you arrived. And for the first time, you realize this strange, ink-stained profession isn't about writing. It's about choosing what deserves eternity. You arrive the next morning expecting another round of nerve-wracking decisions, more manuscripts to judge, more debates about value, more agonizing over which texts deserve twin lives. But the scriptorium is strangely empty, strangely quiet. Lamps burn low. Windows are shuttered. The air feels pressed, heavy, like the city itself is holding its breath. The head librarian stands at the doorway, cloak already fastened. "Come," she says. "We're not working here today." You blink. Where are we going? Her eyes flicker toward the distant walls, toward the city's outer edge, where murmurs of unrest have been growing for weeks. "To the archives," she says. "The old vaults. We must prepare." "Prepare for what?" Your neighbor steps beside you, face pale. "Rumors," she whispers. "Troop movements. Ships on the horizon. No one knows what's true." Your stomach twists. The Empire has weathered storms before, but something in the air feels different, dense, fragile, trembling. You follow the librarians and scribes through narrow streets toward the stone passage leading beneath the city. Lanterns flicker in the draft. Dust spirals in your lamplight like ghosts rising from the floor. "What's happening?" you whisper to the elderly scribe. He walks slower than usual, leaning slightly on his staff. "When danger looms," he murmurs, "we gather the duplicates." You turn sharply. "The duplicates?" "The twins," he says. "The manuscripts we've protected, restored, compared, debated, the ones whose survival matters most." You swallow. "All of them?" "As many as we can." A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your mind. During sieges, invasions, and upheavals, Byzantine scribes rushed to secure twin manuscripts, hiding them in underground chambers, smuggling them to monasteries, even burying them temporarily beneath church floors. Many of the texts that survived antiquity did so only because someone, somewhere, moved quickly when danger drew near. You reach the vaults. The heavy door groans open. Inside are shelves upon shelves of twin manuscripts you recognize. Some you helped copy. Others are older than your grandparents' grandparents. They glow softly under the lantern light, like quiet witnesses waiting to be called. The head librarian hands out lists. "These are priority texts," she says. "We move them first. On your list." A theological codex so intricately illuminated it looks alive. A twin pair of medical treatises translated from Arabic last season. A collection of laws that keeps the city's courts functioning. A tiny book of hymns, sung only once a year. But also, you see it. The manuscript you helped save in yesterday's debate. The turnip stories. Your chest tightens. The librarians lift crates. You join them, sliding manuscripts into padded cases. The vault fills with movement, urgency, whispered prayers. Scribes hurry across the room, their ink-stained fingers trembling as they carry precious volumes. Every sound echoes louder than it should. The wooden creak of shelves, the thud of a closing lid, the distant, muffled noise of the city above. You glance at the elderly scribe. His jaw is tight. "Books survive war," he murmurs. "Only when hands move faster than flames." He hands you a twin pair of medical manuscripts. "These saved lives once," he says. "They must be saved again." As you pack them, a junior scribe rushes in breathlessly. "The northern gate is closing," she whispers. "Soldiers near the harbor. No one knows if they're ours." The head librarian freezes. For a moment, the entire vault is silent. Then she straightens her shoulders. We continue, and the work resumes fiercer, faster, quieter. Scribes form a chain, passing crates hand to hand toward a deeper chamber carved into the rock. It's cold, dry, fortified, a place built for emergency survival. You step inside and feel the temperature drop. The room smells like stone, dust, and centuries. On the far wall, a mosaic of Archangel Michael watches over the space, sword raised, gaze steady. You suddenly understand why this chamber was chosen. As you stack manuscripts along the shelves, your neighbor whispers, historians still argue whether the Byzantines evacuated texts because they believed knowledge was sacred or because they feared losing political memory. You shake your head softly. Both, you reply. Always both. Hours pass like minutes. Outside, faint tremors rattle dust from the ceiling. Distant booms echo down the corridor. You don't know whether they come from thunder, footsteps, or something worse. Your heart hammers in your chest, but your hands keep moving. Lift, wrap, carry, place. Again, again. At one point, the elderly scribe stops beside you. He places a manuscript into your hands, a twin you copied weeks ago. Take this one yourself, he says. Carry it down. Protect it. You swallow hard. Why this one? He smiles sadly. Because you made it, and because creation means responsibility. You carry it deeper into the vault. Every step feels like a promise. When you place the manuscript on the shelf, it settles with a soft whisper, as though relieved. Later, when the last crate is secured, the head librarian closes the chamber doors. She doesn't lock them, just rests her hand on the iron handle, breathing slowly. We can't save everything, she says quietly, but today, we saved enough. The scribe stands silently in the lamplight. The room hums with exhaustion, fear, pride, and something else, hope. As you leave the vault, climbing the stone steps back toward the waking city, you hear shouts in the distance, the clang of metal, the rumble of something heavy moving across the ground. Your heartbeat quickens. The elderly scribe gently touches your shoulder. Remember this, he murmurs. Empires fall. Knowledge does not, if we carry it. His voice softens. This is why we copy twice. So when walls fall, words don't. A gust of cold air sweeps through the passage, rattling the lantern flame. You step into the dim morning light, not knowing what the day will bring, but knowing the twins, deep underground, are safe. 2 copies, 2 chances, 2 lifelines in the dark. When you return to the scriptorium the next morning, the city feels different, quieter, heavier, like someone has draped a velvet shroud over Constantinople. The streets are half empty. Shops open their doors slowly, warily. Even the gulls seem to scream more softly, as if afraid to disturb whatever tension hangs in the air. Inside the scriptorium, the lamps are already lit, though the sun has barely risen. The head librarian sits at her desk, hands folded. The elderly scribe stands beside her. Their faces are drawn but calm, like people who have survived a storm but know another might be forming on the horizon. We have work today, she says softly. Reflective work. You blink. Reflective? That usually means poetry or philosophical copying, something gentle for the hands and heavy for the heart. But on the main table lies something unexpected. 2 manuscripts. One is old edges softened, corners frayed, its cover worn by generations of hands. The other is new, crisp, bright, stitched cleanly, its ink still carrying the faint sheen of last month's lamplight. A pair of twins, separated by time. The elderly scribe gestures for you to sit. These, he says, survived because we copied them twice. You rest your hand on the older one. Its parchment feels warm, alive, as if it's breathing stories into your palm. The newer one feels smooth, almost shy, aware of its youth, its inexperience, its burden. Our task, the librarian says, is to examine how they diverged. You open the 2 volumes and place them side by side, Line by line, they mirror each other, almost. But here and there you see differences, tiny ones, human ones, a softened adjective, a slightly clearer explanation, a margin note in the old copy that was quietly woven into the text of the new, a missing line, a clearer diagram. Nothing malicious, nothing political, just the subtle fingerprints of humans shepherding words across decades. A mainstream historical fact emerges in your mind. Modern scholars rely heavily on Byzantine copies because Byzantines copied obsessively. Their twin manuscripts preserved classical philosophy, early theology, medical treatises, astronomy, mathematics, poetry, plays, speeches, even works that would have vanished entirely if not for two scribes comparing, correcting, and copying texts over and over through centuries of upheaval. You hear the elderly scribe chuckle. Historians still argue whether our double copying was brilliance or paranoia. Your neighbor adds, "Why not both?" You smile. As the morning deepens, scribes gather around the table. One reads aloud from the old manuscript, while another follows the new. It becomes a kind of music, two melodies harmonizing, occasionally dissonant, always intertwined. At one point, a junior scribe interrupts. "This line, it's clearer in the newer version." The head librarian nods, because that scribe understood the original better, or struggled with it, or simply wished to clarify. "And is that allowed?" you ask. The elderly scribe gives you a weary, tender smile. Nothing copied by human hands is perfect. But by copying twice again and again, we catch our flaws. Knowledge survives our imperfections. As the comparison continues, you begin seeing the two manuscripts not as texts, but as lives, each shaped by time, by accidents, by choices, each carrying echoes of the scribes who made them. And suddenly, you feel it, that everything you've done these past days, all the ink-stained hours and aching wrists and frantic preservation efforts, were part of a vast chain stretching centuries long. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind. Some modern librarians joke that they are the descendants of Byzantine duplicators because every time they back up a digital archive in 3 locations, they whisper, "The Byzantines would be proud." Maybe they're right. As afternoon light filters in, the elderly scribe asks you to close both manuscripts. "Look at them," he says. 2 volumes, 2 versions, 2 chances. What do you see? You hesitate. "Survival," you say finally. He nods. "Exactly. Not perfection survival. Words live longer when they walk in pairs." The head librarian motions toward the shelves. "Place them together," she says. "Let their echoes rest side by side." You lift them carefully, one old, one young, and carry them to the archive. When they settle onto the shelf beside one another, you feel a soft, quiet click inside your chest, a sense of wholeness. 2 copies, 2 guardians, 2 voices, singing the same song across time. You turn to leave and pause, because suddenly you realize something profound. Byzantine librarians didn't copy everything twice because they feared loss, though they did. They didn't do it because emperors demanded it, though they often did. They didn't do it because scribes were perfectionists, though they unquestionably were. They copied everything twice because they believed ideas deserve more than one life. And now, standing between shelves glowing with centuries of preserved wisdom, you believe it too. As evening settles in, the head librarian dismisses the scribes. "Rest," she says. "Today we remembered why we endure." The elderly scribe lingers beside you. "One day," he murmurs, "someone will find the twins you helped create. Perhaps one will have traveled far, and the other will have slept quietly here. But together, they will keep our world alive." His eyes soften. "This," he says, "is why we copy twice." He blows out the last lamp. Darkness folds gently around the room, and the manuscripts old and new glow silently in memory's embrace. The night deepens, slow and velvety, as though the city itself finally exhales. The scriptorium grows still, shelves fading into soft silhouettes, manuscripts resting like quiet hearts beating beneath layers of history. Your footsteps soften as you wander once more past the rows of twins, each pair a whisper from ages past, each echo holding steady in the hush. The world feels slower now, softer, as though every parchment edge and every faint ink stroke has loosened its tension, settling into the calm that follows long labor. You allow your own breath to match that pace, longer inhales, longer exhales, letting the chill of the stone floor fade into something comforting, steady, grounding. You imagine the manuscripts you carried earlier, tucked safely into their shelves, wrapped now in the cool embrace of twilight. Imagine the vault beneath the city, the locked chambers of memory, the distant monasteries where twin copies sleep under mountain winds, copies waiting, copies resting, copies glowing faintly in the silence that knowledge prefers. Even the echoes of footsteps from earlier seem to soften, drifting outward until they dissolve completely. The city outside dims into nothing but the distant pulse of its own heartbeat. Here, in this gentle darkness, the work of centuries lies still and safe. You let your shoulders drop, let the last threads of worry dissolve, let the quiet seep in like warm ink spreading across a page. There is nothing left to rescue tonight, nothing left to preserve, only the soft truth that what mattered has been saved twice over. The lamps dim to embers, the shelves fade to silhouettes, and your eyes grow heavier, following the gentle rhythm of the scriptorium's breathing, slow and even, like a whispered lullaby threaded through time. Rest now, the words will keep watch,